Hello, everyone. So welcome to lesson 35. Today we are going to be talking about ocean acidification. And the question that we're kind of trying to figure out an answer for is, how does climate change affect coral reefs? So today's warm-up is, how might coral reefs be affected by climate change? So here, just take your best guess, your best prediction at the question that we are trying to answer today. You don't know the answer, and that's totally fine. Just take your best guess. If you don't know what a coral reef is this kind of thing right here. It's if you think of the ocean and you think of like really colorful plants and animals, just like a lot of different species living all together in one ecosystem, you're probably thinking of a coral reef. Or if you've ever seen Finding Nemo, at the very beginning of the movie, Nemo and his dad live in a coral reef. So it is an ecosystem. How do you think it might be affected by climate change? Go ahead and answer that on Google Classroom, lesson 35 warm-up. For this question, please use your own words and ideas. Avoid using Google, like always. All right, so today's agenda, we just did the warm-up. Next, we're going to do an ocean acidification demonstration. Third, we will do a discussion on coral reefs. Well, in class, we did a discussion on coral reefs. And lastly, we'll do our exit slip. By the end of today, you will be able to evaluate the impact of climate change on the ocean and on coral reefs. And today's focus question, this is the question, actually, this is the unit's focus question. This is what we'll, the question we're trying to answer by the end of the unit is, how will climate change affect the stability of humans and the environment? Cool. So we're going to start out by talking about carbon dioxide and the ocean. So before we can understand how exactly coral reefs have been affected by climate change, we need to understand how carbon dioxide affects the ocean. So we are going to start out today's, we're going to start out by doing some quick review. So number one, how are people adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere? So by now, I hope you are very familiar with the fact that people are adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels and by burning wood. Basically, by burning anything, we're adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Second, thinking back to the carbon cycle, what is the ocean's role in the carbon cycle? So remember when we talked about the carbon cycle, we talked about the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the geosphere, and the biosphere. What was the ocean's role? What was the ocean's job in that carbon cycle? So you might not remember, but the ocean actually had a really big role in the carbon cycle. And that's because the ocean is one half of the things involved in the process called diffusion. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere actually has the ability to diffuse into the ocean. Remember, diffusion means spread out. So when there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it can make tiny little bubbles, and it can go into the ocean. And vice versa. So tiny little bubbles in the ocean can go back into the atmosphere too. And there's sort of a balance between carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and carbon dioxide in the ocean. So diffusion is going to be really important for us to remember as we talk about how carbon dioxide affects the ocean. And so one last thing before we get into that is we should talk very briefly about pH. So pH, as you can see on my screen, it's a term that people use when they're talking about water in like a pool or a fish tank. And maybe you've seen people take a sample of water and compare it to colors on a chart to test the pH of the water. So the pH scale is a way to measure whether water is acidic or basic. So acidic means acid. And I think you've probably heard the word acid before. Like it's pretty common on like science, or what are they? science fiction movies where like, maybe there's like this giant lake of acid and like someone accidentally dips their hand in it and they pull their hand out and like all the skin and muscles gone. It's super gross. But that would be an acid. That would be a much stronger acid than any of the acids we usually work with, or that you would find in nature. But that is an acid. Sort of the opposite of acid is base. So base or basic. And we're not going to get into too much discussion of what acidic versus basic and what that means. But today we are going to watch a demonstration that is going to help us determine whether the ocean is becoming more acidic or more basic. I'll give you a hint. The title of this lesson is Ocean Acidification. The ocean is becoming more acidic, more like an acid. So on your own, I'm not going to play this right now, but on your own, on this PowerPoint or on this Google Slides, which is on Google Classroom, please watch this video of me. I am doing an experiment for you, and you're going to see I'm going to blow into a cup of water. And the carbon dioxide in my breath is actually going to make the water acidic. And the water is actually going to change colors because of a chemical that I've added to it. So go ahead and watch that so that you understand how this works in the real world, how this works when carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes into the ocean. How does that affect the ocean? Right? Once you have, don't play this. No. Okay. Once you have watched that video, I'm going to check your comprehension. So please go watch the video and then we'll talk about it really quickly. Awesome. By now, you should have watched the video. If you did not watch the video, pause the video, go watch my demonstration video. But if you have, let's talk about it. So number one, what happened to the water in the experiment? The water in the experiment changed colors. It started out clear, like normal water, and then it was green after I added a little bit of pH indicator, a chemical, to it. And then after I started blowing carbon dioxide into the water, it turned yellow because it became an acid. So number two, has the water's pH changed? Yes, the water's pH changed. The pH lowered. So it became more acidic, more like an acid. Number three, what are the components of this model? What do they represent? So this experiment, we can actually think of it as like a model for the ocean and the atmosphere. So the water in the cup represented the ocean. My breath represented the atmosphere. And we saw how the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere affects the water. All right, so now that we understand how ocean acidification works, we're going to move on to coral reefs. So coral reefs, again, are created in shallow tropical waters by millions of tiny animals called corals. So each of these things here, these like colorful plant-looking things, are corals. And you might be led to think that this is like one plant, and that is one plant, and that is one plant. But actually, each of these plants is an animal, and it's not one, it is millions of tiny animals. So like this orange coral right here is made up of millions of tiny animals working together, living together in a colony. And so each coral colony makes a skeleton for itself. And over time, these skeletons build up to create coral reefs. So you can see sort of behind all these colorful corals, there's like this gray concrete looking stuff. Those are old coral skeletons. And over time, they build up. So over time, it can become sort of like a mound of just like coral skeletons. So protecting coral reefs is very important because they provide food and habitat for many kinds of fish and marine animals. So you can see that there are a lot of species that live here, and they all really like to hide in the coral reefs. Coral reefs are pretty safe. Second, coral reefs serve as natural breakwaters against storms and hurricanes. A breakwater is something that stops really big waves. So if there's a really big storm or a hurricane, those things create really big waves. And what happens is when the wave goes over the coral reef, it actually loses some energy. So coral reefs are really important for protecting those of us who live on the shore. And lastly, protecting coral reefs is very important because they provide fishing and recreational opportunities for millions of people. You can see here this diver is enjoying, just going around the coral reef. But coral reefs also provide a lot of fishing opportunities for people too. So next we're going to watch a video about how ocean acidification affects marine ecosystems. As you watch this video, you're going to fill out Lesson 35 Coral Reefs Video Questions, which is on Google Classroom. There are 3 questions. Question 1 is, what is making the ocean more acidic? Question 2 is, what happens when the ocean becomes more acidic? And question 3, what 2 events are evidence that ocean acidification has already arrived on Western shores? You can watch this video right in this Google form. It's very convenient, very easy. So go ahead and give that a watch on your own and then answer these 3 questions. When you are done, we are going to move on to the exit slip. So the exit slip question today is, what are 2 ways that excessive CO2 can lead to changes in the ocean? So today we learned about one way that excessive CO2 can lead to changes in the ocean. Excessive, if you don't know what that means, it means extra, or like a lot of, too much of. So we learned about one way that too much CO2 can affect the ocean. And then in past classes, the past 2 classes, I think lesson 33 and lesson 34, we learned about other ways that a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere can change the ocean. So for this question, please use your own words and ideas. Avoid using Google, as always. And that is all that we have for today. So I hope to see you in class next week or next time. Bye.